Hello and welcome back to the Go-Stroid development series. Today we'll be creating our first little enemy AI, the UFO. Now, this isn't really going to be the most advanced or intelligent AI. In fact, it won't even really be an AI. It's more or less just going to be a random direction picker using a pseudo state machine. So, very, very simple state machine, just in control of like 3 little states, pretty much just 2. Yeah, that's kind of going to be it. Now, this might be a bit of a longer video, and I'm going to go a little bit slower because there is a chunk of code for this one, just to get the UFO doing the things that we wanted to do. So first, let's actually go and just set up our base UFO. So to do that, we're going to go and hit the plus icon. We're going to go to other node, and we're going to make this of type character body 2D. Now I'm going to rename this to base UFO entity. Now, the reason why I like to name things, you've seen me do this with like the asteroid, UFO, there we go. You see me do this with the asteroid, projectiles, and a bunch of other things. Base is my variation for when I plan on using inheritance, right? So I will go base UFO entity, which means the base will be whatever I set it to. Then I can create an inherited object for a large UFO entity or a small UFO entity, and I can just basically remove the base version or base naming structure inside of that, and it just allows me to keep things very structured and very easy to find. So with that done, let's now start adding what we need to actually get this functioning, right? Actually, let's just save this first. We'll save it. So we'll use Control S or Command S to save. We're going to Scenes. We're going to create a new folder, and this one will be for the UFOs. And then I'm going to hit save. So to get an idea of what we want to add to this, we can actually go into our file system, our file tree here, down into Scenes, Asteroids, and we can say open up the large asteroid, and we can see what this has. Well, we know that character body 2Ds need a collision shape and a sprite. We have a screen wrap handler, a health handler, and a hurtbox handler. So that's pretty much what it's going to need. It won't be needing a hitbox handler because it's going to be firing projectiles, unless, of course, we want to make its collision also a problem, which we may actually do now that I think about it. But for now, let's just kind of move through this slowly. So let's add everything we need to. First, collision shape 2D. We don't actually need to give it a shape, it just needs that so it stops being angry. Then we, of course, need a sprite 2D. Let's go and handle, or add the screen wrap handler as well. So that will be Control-Shift-A or Command-Shift-A, and then type in screen wrap handler. Let's do the health handler. Once again, Control-Shift-A, Command-Shift-A, health handler, and finally the hurtbox handler. So let's add a sprite to this real quick. Just to give us a quick view sprite, we'll go into Assets, PNG, come down until we find UFO. I'm going to do UFO blue just to get this started. I like the look of that little UFO. It's going to actually stick to this size for now as well. We won't need to change sizing or anything like that. Now let's go into our hurtbox handler. Let's click on that. Assign the health handler that we have, because remember the hurtbox links with the health handler. Let's go and give the health an actual health amount. We're going to give it the same amount of health as the large asteroid, so that will be 13 health. And finally, we'll click on the hurtbox handler, right click on it, go down to editable children, go into collision shape, and we'll give it a new shape or circle shape 2D. And we're going to make this the same size as the saucer here, or the same size as the UFO. We could do it just a little bit bigger, just to make sure it's just a little bit more encompassing, so if we miss even just a little bit, it still connects. One last thing I did forget, of course, is the invulnerability time inside the hurtbox handler. Let's knock this down to 0.2 to make sure it does have some iframes when it needs to have them, and sometimes it doesn't. And yeah, so that's the base setup. Let's hit Control-Shift-A, or not Control-Shift-A, Control-S or Command-S, there we go. And now we need to think about what else we want to add to this, right? So what do the UFOs do? Well, they move around and they shoot. So they're going to need a weapon handler like the player has. And they're going to need probably a couple of timers, right? So let's go and create these just to kind of get them laid out. And I'll kind of explain why we're using them as we go. So the first one, let's go Control-A on the UFO entity, and we'll create one timer. And then we're going to use Control-D or Command-D to duplicate that timer. So we have timer 1, timer 2. I'm going to rename the first timer into the movement timer. And the second one, which is actually quite important, I'm going to rename to rotation timer. Now I'm going to shift click on both of these and I'm going to move them just above the screen wrap handler. So now we have nearly our entire node structure. Let's go and create the base enemy weapon handler as well. Let's go into a new scene, other node, and we're going to do this of type marker 2D. So it's just going to be a positional marker. Now let's go and rename this to base enemy weapon handler. Then hit Control S to save. We're going to go and save this under the handlers folder. Going to also add a script to this. Then I'm going to give it a class name of base enemy weapon handler. There we go. So the smart me would have taken the player weapon handler and kind of made that into something that can be substituted or used into other things. Now, there are some big key differences that I don't really feel like coding around would be useful in a small, kind of more simple project like this without overcomplicating it too much. So we're going to avoid overcomplicating it as like any more than it kind of already has been, and we're just going to create a new weapon handler. So let's hit Control S and save. Let's go back to the base UFO entity, left click on the root, Control Shift A or Command Shift A. We will add the base enemy weapon handler. I'll pull that above the movement timer and rotation timer, and that is our node structure sorted. Now I'm going to close these scripts, close these out. There we go. So we now have the base UFO entity ready to go. Let's go and give the base UFO entity a script. Now, a smart thing to do here when it comes to inheritance is to just create an inherited scene from this immediately, and then create a script from that will attach to the inherited version, and then do that for every inherited version, or create a script that it can inherit from. We're just going to do this relatively simply, kind of the same thing we've done with the asteroids when it comes to how we want to adjust their sizing to be small or large. We'll use like either a tag system, a new, or just a bunch of different settings for them. So let's add a script to this. Let's remove all of the code in here. We don't need any of that code. Let's go give this a class name. So class underscore name of base UFO entity. I cannot spell the word entity. Entity. There we go. Now let's start giving it some variables. So let's think about what it's going to need, right? It's going to need to, one, have different states that it can be inside of. Now a state machine can get very, very complex. We are not going to be using a complex state machine. We are going to be using what's known as an enumerated state machine. So an enumerated state machine is basically a little stored enum inside of the script that we want to kind of use it on, and all of the data of that, it revolves around that state machine, is just stored inside that script. That just makes it very easy for us to modify it, and it makes it so it's, once again, very, very simple. So what are the states that we're going to want in this state machine? Well, we're going to want a move state, a fire state, and an idle state. So move will, move around. Then when it enters the fire state, it will come to a stop. It will fire the amount of projectiles it needs to fire. And then it will flick to either idle or move, depending on what we want to do. And then it will kind of just repeat through that cycle. And it adds this kind of level of randomness to the little AI that we're adding, right? It makes it a little bit random, a little bit spontaneous, and a little bit fun to kind of fight, I suppose. But for that to happen, first we're going to need some exports and some onreadies. So let's first create some, let's do exports for the movement and rotation timer first. So let's go export movement, and don't forget var. So export var movement underscore timer of type timer is equal to null. And now we'll do the same thing for the rotation timer. Export var rotation underscore timer of type timer equal to null. Now if I hit Control S or Command S and save, go to the base UFO entity, let's go and hook these up inside of the inspector here. So movement timer done, rotation timer linked. So these are both linked. These don't need to be exports, they could be onreadies. I'm just preferring to use exports at the moment. So what's the next thing we want? Well, we're going to want to be able to give it a random amount of time that it's going to be able to be allowed to move. So let's set a base min and a base max for the amount of movement time that it can have, or amount of time it's allowed to move. So let's go export var min underscore movement underscore time of type float, and we'll set that equal to 10.0 for now. And then we'll do the same thing. So var max underscore movement underscore time of type float, set that equal to 5.0. And now I see myself making typos right here. So movement, there we go, yep. So we've got the min and max set up. Hit Control S or Command S and save. We have them saved here. Perfect. So what's the next thing we want? Well, we're going to want a movement speed, right? So let's go and hit another export var for the movement underscore speed of type float, and we'll set that equal to 100.0 for now. Let's also go and get an onReady variable for the base enemy weapon handler here. We'll drag that in, Control drop at the very top of our script. That's where I like my onReadies to be usually. Then as a base weapon handler, make sure that is typeset like so, or typecast like so. And that's pretty much it. The only other thing we're actually going to need is a internal variable, so a non-exported variable for the current underscore movement underscore direction, which will be of type vector2, set that equal to vector2 dot 0. There we go. So that's pretty much everything set up variable wise. Now the last two variables that we technically need, now I'm kind of separating these a little bit, is the state machine specific ones. So how do we plan on doing this? Well, to do an enum, all you have to do is write the word enum, and then you can name it. So instead of doing var, you just go enum and then you give it its name. So in this case, states. Now I'm doing this with the capital S just to make sure I can differentiate a bit easier. And then you open it up like a dictionary, so with your curly braces like so. And now you just create the states that you want to have. So capital M for move, capital F for fire, and finally the idle state. Always a good idea to cap off every single one of your states with this little comma here to make sure that if you want to add more, you can already immediately add more. So that's our states for our state machine. The last one that we need is a new variable. So var current underscore state, and we'll set that of type states. We'll set that equal to, let's just do states dot, because we need to access it. So we need to go states dot, and we'll access the idle state. That's what we'll start off in, is the idle state. So what's next? We've got all of our exports and our onReadies set up and ready to go. We've got our state machine stuff ready to go. Now we need to actually start creating our functions, right? So let's get access to the ready function first, then write pass. Now let's also get access to the physics process function and write pass, so we have access to those. I'll create a bunch of new lines here to make some space. And now what do we want? Well, we're going to want a function that just handles the states, right? It's going to be the thing that allows us to pick between the different states. So let's write func handle underscore states. There we go. With no parameters, and it will be of void return type. Now, how do we plan on handling the states? Well, really simply, we're just going to do what's known as a matching function. We're going to match the current state to the idle, move, or fire state. Now, how do we do match statements? Well, if I haven't done them before, I will show you how to do them now. We will write the word match, and then we will match the current state like so, and cap that off with a colon. So this is how we open it. Now we need to do our cases. So in this case, the first case we want is the states.idle. So cap that off with a colon, and now we enter the what we want to actually do in here. So what do we want to do in here? Well, we can do anything we want, but for now I'm going to write pass. Then I'm going to enter, create a new line, and we will now do states.move. New line, write pass. and then finally states.fire, new line pass. So this is our state or match state function, right? So if we are in the idle state, if the current state is set to the idle state, it will run code within this block here. If it's in the move state, it will run code here, and if it will in the fire state, it will run code here. So that means we now actually need to get the code sorted for it, right? So let's first go and set the idle state. Let's go func idle underscore state. So let's design the code for the idle state. So we want a no parameters and a void return type like so. What do we want to do in our idle state? Well, for now, all I actually want to do in the idle state is to take the current state and then set that equal to states.move. So we're starting in the idle state, right? All this is going to do here is make it so the current state gets set to the move state, and then we start moving around. So let's now go and into our match statement here for states.idle. And instead of pass, let's just call that idle state code. Now let's go out to the physics process, and then let's write handle states. And then just after it, because we are a character body 2D and we plan on using velocity, move underscore and slide. So those are the two things I usually tend to forget, and then I kind of question myself on why it's not working. Just forget to do those things. Don't forget to do those things. But we have our idle state ready. So what's the next state we want to do? Well, we've got it moving into the move state, right? So let's go and start handling the move state. So let's go func move underscore state. What do we want to do? Well, the first thing I'm going to want to do for the move state is kind of randomize the rotation. I want the rotation of the UFO to be random, right? So it just starts picking a different facing direction to move towards. So to do that, I'm going to do something really fun. I'm going to use these movement and rotation timers. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to call the movement timer, not the movement timer, sorry, the rotation timer, and I'm going to use dot start, and now I just pass in a random range. So I'm going to go rand underscore f range from 0 and 3. Now 0 and 3 is a bit too quick for the turning, so let's do 1 and 3. We can add export variables for rotation time or rotation amount as well if we want to, but that's that sorted. So let's go down into the rotation timer, go to the node in the inspector here, and then connect the timeout function. So when that times out, all we want to do is grab our rotation and then set that equal to the rand f range, like so. We want to use 0, and as I said when we were doing the large asteroids, 2 times pi, or in this case, tau. So we're now getting a random 360-degree rotation, and it will just start spinning in that direction or that rotation every single time we do this. So perfect, right? Actually, very quickly before we do anything else, inside of the handle states, in the states.move, let's pass through the move state code as well. There we go. So with that happening, we can now start moving on to modifying the velocity. So let's just go inside the move state. Let's go velocity is equal to the, we're going to want to open parentheses for this. So parentheses vector2.right. Why are we doing vector2.right? Well, vector2.right is our facing direction. We are facing right. And we're going to want to go times the movement speed. So we're now going right times the movement speed. So we're going to be moving at 100 units per second, dot rotated by the rotation. All this is going to do is make sure we are moving in the correct direction, but we're moving at 100 units per second. So that should actually just run. We should be able to just run this code now, and it should technically just work. Let's make sure this is all set up. It is. It all is. Let's go to main. Let's go to the 2D scene. Let's go to the entity container. Hit Control A and add. Oh, sorry, Control Shift A and add. And we will go and type UFO. Grab the base UFO entity. Pull that down. And click play and see if it explodes. So our ship is now moving. But as you can see, it is not actually rotating at all. So let's go back and fix that, right? So the rotation timer is being started inside of the move state, and I have figured out something that I'm doing wrong. So because of me being a bit ditzy here, we are kind of consistently starting the rotation timer. Every time we start the rotation timer, it's just kind of resetting it. So why is that happening? Well, that's because we are handling this inside of the physics process. What we're going to want to do here is, instead of having the move state inside of the rotation timer inside of the move state, we are going to want to basically put the rotation timer inside of the idle state first. Yeah, so we're going to want to put it inside of the idle state. Now, that means that this will consistently rotate all the time. Now, we don't need to worry about that. What we do want to do, however, is make sure that we are moving. So let's hit play and try this. As you can see, we are now rotating in different directions, like so. Currently stuck in the corner up there, but yep, it's now moving around as much as we want it to. Perfect. So let's go and design the fire state. Now, I will just very quickly say this. This is something we can change very kind of easily, or fix kind of easily. And we will be doing that inside of the fire state. So let's go func fire underscore state of type void. And the first thing we're going to do is grab the rotation timer and set that equal to, use dot stop. So this will now stop rotating when we enter the fire state. But we are having a bit of an issue. We will never enter the fire state because we're never leaving the move state. So that means we need to start the movement timer. Fun fact, we can do the same thing in the idle state again. So in the idle state, we can, as we change our current state to move, I'm going to do this just above the move. I'm going to write movement timer dot start. And then I can go randf range between the min movement time and the max movement time. And I really dislike the rotation timer being below when we change states. So I'm going to highlight that. I'm going to use Alt and I'm going to press up on the arrow keys. And that just moves that line up for us. So let's hit play and just make sure that we're still turning, we're still doing all of the things, still working the same way it should. But what's not happening? Well, the movement timer here, one, it needs to be one shot, so it will actually stop. And two, that makes me think the rotation timer might need to be one shot as well, actually. Give my brain 1 second to catch up with what I'm doing. Yeah, look at that, that works. Okay, fair enough. So moving the rotation time into the top of the move state works as well, but we do want to start the movement timer instead of the idle state. Rotation timer needs to be set to one shot, and the movement timer also needs to be set to one shot. So now we need to connect the movement timer signal, like so, to the base UFO script. And what do we want to do on movement timer timeout? Well, we're going to want to first set our velocity equal to vector2 dot 0. So we want to bring the ship to a stop. And then we want to change the current state into the fire state. So state dot fire. And that moves us into our fire state. So the rotation, the fire timer should also stop like so. Let's go and check. Give it a second. It's set up to, I think, like 10 seconds. Yep, there it goes. So it stopped. It's no longer, it shouldn't be rotating. Give it a few more seconds. Okay, yep, it's no longer rotating. It's no longer moving. We have entered the fire state. So the final thing that we want to do is, one, pass in the fire state code inside of states.fire. We can remove rotation underscore timer.stop because we don't need to stop that. But now we need to start handling our fire, right? So let's go and handle our fire. And actually, let's do a quick bit of code cleanup real quick, because this is bothering me a little bit. Before we go into fire state, let's scroll just below our fire state. Let's create a new function here. So we'll go func. We're just going to do get underscore random underscore time. void return. Actually, no, it needs to be a float return type. And you guessed it, all we're going to be doing is copying this randf range inside of our movement timer.start. So cut that out, come down here into the get random time, return, and return the result of that random range between min and max movement time. We might want to do get random underscore movement time to make sure this is a little bit more specific for our use case. And then we can just return the get random movement time inside the movement timer, and that will give us a random time. I prefer this, it's just a little bit easier to read and it gives us a bit more of a split functionality. So with us now entering the fire state, we need to actually design the fire state code. Well, the fire state code is actually going to be really simple. I'm going to hit Control F or Command S and save, and I'm going to go back into the base enemy weapon handler. This is where the fun begins for our projectile stuff. And a lot of it's already actually done for us, which is really, really good. So let's actually open up the base enemy weapon handler. Let's go and add, so we'll go Control A, and we're going to add a timer to this. This timer is just going to be in charge of, you guessed it, the fire rate. So same thing that we have for the player, we have a fire rate set up. So let's go and create an onReady variable for this as a timer. Let's create the projectile resource. We're going to need one of those. Actually, just to make life easier, because I don't want to just be like, hey, do this, do this, do this. I want to be able to actually go through and look at this with you. Let's go to our scenes in our file tree. Let's scroll down to the projectile. Where is it? Not managers. It's a handler. There we go. The player weapons handler.gd. So, or and the TSCN. Which open the TSCN. What does it have? Well, it is a node 2D type of type, or it has a marker 2D for the anchor and a fire rate timer. And the code is, you know, when we press the button, emit the signal, which is really good. We need to keep this in mind. We're emitting a signal which takes a resource, the position, and the target. Sets campfire to false and starts the fire rate timer. Fire rate timer triggers, sets campfire to true. And that's it, that's the code. So that's what we need to set up now just for the enemy. So we need to think about this in an AI standpoint, because we aren't going to be triggering it by left clicking, it's going to be triggering itself. So let's first get the export var ready for the projectile underscore resource of type base projectile resource, set that equal to null. Let's now add a export var for the fire underscore rate underscore time. Actually, we'll just do fire rate. There we go. Of type float. We'll set that equal to 0.2 to start. Actually, we'll do 1.0 just to have a nice round starting number. And that should technically be it, right? Now, I'm going to purposefully leave something out so you can witness the amazing of what's going to happen in the very, very dumb. So first, let's do a can fire boolean. We'll go var can underscore fire. I'll set that equal to true, so it needs to know that it can fire. Now we are going to create our function for fire projectile. So func fire underscore projectile. It's going to return nothing, so void return type. My brain has stopped working. There we go. Once again, my brain has stopped working. I'm going to read past. Now I'm going to say this real quick. I know some of you may not like me purposefully leaving things out and then coming back and fixing it, but it's always a good idea to learn what can go wrong and why certain things are in place in code. It really does help learning. If you dislike that, please leave a comment saying stop doing that. You know, please stop. If you love it, let me know. But let's first do our check. If can fire. Actually, we won't even check the boolean. We're just going to first get the player ship, because that's what we're going to want to fire at. Right? We're going to go var player underscore ship of type player ship. Set that equal to get underscore tree dot get underscore first node in group of group will be the player. Now we're going to make sure that that works by going player ship, or by going if player ship is equal to null return. So leaving a couple of things out here, and if you can guess what I'm actually leaving out, I'm really proud of you. That's amazing. Next thing we're going to do is call the signal bus, fire that init create projectile signal like we're doing for the player. So init create projectile. It's going to need a projectile resource. It's going to need a position, so we want this current position. And it's going to need a enemy position, or the target. So it's going to want the player ship dot global underscore position. So we're now emitting the signal. That's going to create the projectile and pass through everything that it needs to pass through. And then we're going to want to start our fire rate timer, fire rate underscore timer dot start, and we will just pass through the fire rate. Control S and save. Let's just leave it at that. Let's go and test this, right? I'm going to comment out the fire rate timer. Now, if I forget the fire rate timer, let's go to the base UFO enemy, or yeah, base UFO entity, click on the base enemy weapon here, and we need to go and add a projectile resource to it. Now, we don't have one for the enemies, so let's just give it the, yeah, no, we're definitely going to need to set it up. I was going to give it the player one, and I thought that might actually explode the enemy. We don't want it to explode the enemy. So under player resource here, we're going to, in the projectiles resource folder here, we're going to create a new folder. We're just going to call this the enemy underscore projectiles. There we go. We're now going to left click on the primary or player primary laser, use Control D to duplicate. We're going to rename this to UFO laser 01. Hit duplicate, drag that down into the enemy projectiles so that's separate. Now we can double click on it and we can change what we want to change. I want to change the texture to a different texture. So let's use load, assets, PNG, lasers. Let's use the laser red here. Projectile speed, I'm going to lower down to 200 for now, and I'm going to change the tag to enemy. I was going to change the damage down to 1 because our player only has 3 health. That's mostly set up, right? There is one small issue. The tagging system that we put in here. I said to you that we are going to design a tagging system, but we're not going to do it yet. Well, we're going to do it now. Now, the tagging system is where it gets a little bit confusing and a little bit complex. I say complex because it's not something that we have actually covered yet in any of my videos, and it's just a very interesting way of changing collision data. So let's go and sort that out. What we're going to do is go down into scenes. We're going to go down into the projectiles and the base projectile entity, and we'll open up the actual scene for it as well. So this is our base projectile entity. If I click on the base projectile entity and I go down to the hitbox handler, you'll see that the collision layer and mask are auto preset to the basically be fired from the player and be connecting to the enemy. That is okay, but we want to be able to use this base projectile entity for enemies as well. That way we don't have to create a new one, right? So to do that, we're going to need to figure out how we can set the collisions. Now, keywording there is very specific. Set collisions. So we've got set texture, direction, speed. Let's add a function for set underscore collision. What is it going to take? Well, it's going to take a tag of type string. It's going to be of void return type. And now we can do a, you guessed it, matching system. So match tag. The only tags there will be player. We'll write pass for now because it doesn't need to change any collision data on player. And the last one will, of course, be enemy. And this is where we need to actually set the collisions correctly. So it will always be preset to player, that's fine, but it will never be set to enemy unless we set it. So we actually need to start modifying our hitbox handler, specifically the layer and mask values. So I'm going to make sure that the hitbox handler is open here so we can check the layers and masks. I'm going to use dot set underscore collision layer value first. Now, this is very, very specific, right? We could just go and set let's see, 3 should be our enemy layer and 2 should be our player mask. So that's what we want to set them to, 3 and 2, not 2 and 3. If I just go and set 3 to true and 2 to true, it will be on all 4 layers. That tells us we need to go and set them individually to false first. So we want to set the collision layer to, so 2 is the one that we're currently on for player, to false, not true, false. Now I'm going to copy this line here so we don't have to type it all out again. And I'm going to now, that is way too many tabs, change collision layer 3 to true. So that is basically going to change, it's basically just going to untick 2 and change it to 3. That's it. And now we need to do the same thing for, of course, the layer or the mask. So let's go hitbox handler dot set underscore collision mask value 3 to false, and then hitbox handler dot set collision mask value 2 to true. And that is our collision tagging system. I need to make sure that S is capitalized in string. There we go. So that's our collision tagging system done. Now, how are we setting the texture, direction, speed, and damage? Well, we're not. Of course, we have a projectile creation or a projectile factory that's actually doing it for us. So let's go scenes, go into managers, and go down to the projectile factory.gd. And now if we scroll down to the build projectile function that we've got here, this is where we're setting everything. So let's go and also go to new underscore projectile dot set underscore collision. And we want to pass through the projectile resource dot projectile tag. And there we go. We are now creating an enemy projectile. Hit Control S and save. Now let's go and hit play and just watch things not function correctly. See how many crashes we get first. So it's got to, 1, flick into the firing. I may have to, okay, so it flicked into it, but as you can see, it's not firing any projectiles. Now, why is that? Well, if I go back to the base UFO entity, 1, we aren't calling it, right? So that was the first thing that we forgot. We're not calling the fire projectile or fire weapon, or we're not calling that function we just created. So inside of the base UFO entity, let's call the base enemy weapon handler dot fire projectile. So now we're setting that up to fire the projectile. I'm going to change the base UFO entity, there we go. Change the movement times here from 1 to 3 just to get it to kind of tick faster, and let's try again. Now let's see what happens. It's frozen, it's not doing anything. Now, why is it not doing anything? Well, we know for a fact that we are toggling the fire state. We are going through to the, where's fire state? I just had it here. We are calling fire projectile. So now I'm going to teach you something really fun. If we hit the red dot right on the side here next to the fire projectile and then hit play, and we let it just run through, we are going to do some debugging. So this is a breakpoint. It allows us to see exactly what's happening. And using these buttons here, we can either step past, or step over, or step into what's happening. So let's step into this function. Okay, so it's trying to get the player entity. Player ship, null. Projectile resource, null. Okay, so is the player ship equal to null? Well, yes, because we're not actually finding a player. Return. And that's why it's not finding any player. That's why it's not firing any projectiles, because we have 2 issues. First one, projectile resource, empty. Let's go fix that one first. So resources, projectiles, enemy projectiles, UFO laser. Done. We'll set the fire rate to, let's go 0.4 to start. And finally, the player isn't actually in a group. So let's go to main, go to player, like so, go to node, go into groups and go with a capital P, player group. And now let's hit play and see what else happens. We hit our breakpoint. Don't forget to undo your breakpoints. I always forget those. And now we have an infinite stream of death projectiles. 1, I love the pattern that this makes, just spawning that many projectiles. But yeah, they can destroy us, which is great. So all of that's working, but the only thing that isn't, of course, is we are now firing an infinity amount of projectiles. So let's go and just fix that, right? Let's go and apply those fixes. Now, let's go back to the base enemy weapon handler and make our fixes. First, we need to check our can fire boolean. So first, let's go if can fire is equal to true. We want to be able to do all of this. And then, of course, we want to fire the fire rate timer. So let's go and connect the fire rate timer back up as well. There we go. Inspector, node, signals, timeout, reconnect that. That is now connected. So on timeout, we want can fire to equal true, like so. We want to also toggle can fire to false after we have created our projectile. So can fire is equal to false. So we are now actually doing the thing, right? We are now toggling this, but there is an issue with this. We will still never leave the fire state. In fact, if we just let this run, it will forever shoot at our player ship. Now it's firing a little bit happier, if you ask me. It's not insanely too many projectiles, but that's because we don't actually have a way of leaving the fire state yet. So to do this, what we're going to do is two things. One, we are going to set a count. So we'll go fire underscore count, which will be of type integer, and we'll set that equal to 0. And now we're going to create a internal signal. So we'll go signal reload underscore weapon. Now you can probably see where I'm going with this. The fire count, every time we fire the weapon, so yeah, every time we fire the weapon, we are going to increase the count. Now fire, which means on the timeout, I'm going to go and set can fire, not can fire equal true, just below can fire equal true, sorry, we want to go and up the fire count. So fire count plus equals 1. So every time we fire, we're now incrementing the fire count. It's perfect. So with that going up, we can now do one more check here. So after can fire equal false, what we can do is we can go if the fire count is greater than or equal to the, well, what are we actually, we're going to need a max, right? So we're going to need a, let's do up here, let's go var, let's do an export for this, var max underscore ammo, let's call it max ammo, int, and we'll set that equal to 3 for now. Scroll down. So if the fire count is equal or greater than the max ammo, well, we want to do something. Well, first we're going to make sure can fire is set equal to true. Now, why am I doing this? Well, this is going to be where we start leaving the state, and if we don't set can fire equal to true, it may never actually get set back to true. So this is a bit of a redundancy check, just in case the timer doesn't fire or something goes wrong, because technically speaking, this fire rate timer should also be on one shot. So yeah, this is a redundancy check, basically. We want can fire to equal to true, and then we want to reset the fire count back to 0, and then we want to just emit that reload underscore weapon signal. So let's do that. And to stop the fire rate timer from firing again, we are just going to return out of the if statement and therefore the code, block code, or code block. There we go. Hit Control S or Command S and save. And that's actually it, right? Now we can go back into our base UFO entity. We can go into the ready function here. We can call that base weapon handler dot reload weapon and use dot connect, and we can connect it to, well, what do we want to connect it to? Well, I'm just going to connect it straight to the idle state code, to be honest with you. We can just go idle underscore state, and that gets us back into our loop of moving from idle to move to fire and then back to idle, and that's it. We are technically done. Let's go hit play and find out. So 1, 2, 3, 4. So it's firing 4 shots. There is probably a good reason that it's firing 4 shots, but this is pretty much what we want to do. Now, I want you to note that down. 4 shots, that is a bug. So let's keep that in mind for the next video, or next few videos, because we're going to be kind of racking up a few little bugs here and there and trying to make sure they function. Last thing we want to do, of course, is check if we can destroy it, right? By the look of it, no. So why can we not destroy it? Let's go to the base UFO entity. the hurtbox handler, the collision shape, oh sorry, yeah, just the hurtbox handler, go into collision, and it is because the hurtbox handler isn't set correctly. So we want this to be looking for player, and it needs to be on the enemy layer. So 2 on the mask, 3 on the layer, and 1, 2, 3, we are firing 20 damage lasers, so it's destroying it very, very quickly. But we are done. That's it. That is the whole kind of mini UFO thing that we've got. In the next video, we're going to be looking at how we can actually start spawning these with an incrementing level, so we don't have to just place them in. So that's going to be a lot of fun. That's going to be our difficulty increase where we start spawning big UFOs, and then after a certain point, they might start spawning small UFOs out of them, or we might just get some small UFOs and start messing around with those. But yes, thank you for watching. I hope you have enjoyed. I hope you're having a great day and a great game dev journey. If you have any questions, ask in the comments, or please come down to the Discord. A link is in the description. But yeah, thank you for watching. I will see you in the next video.